As we've seen, one important definition of public value has to do with the idea that there are a collective public, a we, that's making judgments as to public value rather than simply a bunch of individual I's, as would be characteristic of a market process. Now, the idea that there's a collective arbiter of value or a public arbiter of value seems to fly in the face of an awful lot of liberal political theory that sort of says the only, certainly the most important and perhaps the only appropriate arbiter of value is an individual. And it's true that at the core of a liberal society is the recognition of the importance of individuals as arbiters of value and the people who get to decide what they're going to do with their own lives. But saying that you have an inalienable right to decide on how you'd like to live your life and how you'd like to enjoy your liberties and stuff doesn't necessarily mean that there couldn't be a judgment made by the body politic that overruled that particular desire. You might have a desire to do all kinds of things that would create problems for the society, not just benefits for you. And with respect to those things, you can expect the society to say, well, even though you'd like to do those things, you may not, because it may not turn out to be good for the rest of us. And so we understand that there could be a collective acting through government that would restrain your activity. That same capability might be there, though, to protect your rights as well as to impose your restrictions on what you do. And the combination of those two things, getting the balance right between the protection of your rights and the imposition of duties, is an important part of the judgments that go into what are the publicly valuable circumstances that we'd like to create, the conditions of security, of right relationships, etc., that would make it easier for us to live in our lives. Now, it's clear that these ideas about a liberal society, which has individuals with their own views about their own interests and stuff like that, that also has individual citizens who are beginning to think about the welfare and rights and liberties of others, all right? And a public that's being called into existence through some kind of complicated process that's designed to give everybody a voice so that when a decision is made that runs contrary to some people's ideas, the people who didn't get what they wanted can feel satisfied that at least they were heard. That idea of a society is under attack. But it's very important that we keep in mind that an important part of both the rights and the responsibilities of citizenship is to participate in what Hannah Arendt once called creating the architecture of our own restraint, so that we would the liberty that we would have would be the part that we were free to do, and where we weren't free to do it, what would be important is that we got a role in deciding the particular way in which we were going to be constrained. Now, all of that goes into the challenge of citizenship. And it's important that we think about public value as citizens, that we restore to ourselves the idea that there are things that we want for others, and that the way we decide how we're going to use the powers of the state is to join with one another and decide on a collective idea about what would be a good and just society. Those are very important from the point of view of citizens. You as public sector executives, though, have a special responsibility and a special relationship to the idea of public value. You're the ones that we're counting on to be able to use the powers of the state to create the society that the citizens would like to see. You may even have a very important role in helping the citizens come to think and act like citizens according to the way in which you arrange your public deliberations and the way in which we consult with the citizens and interact with them to decide what would be worth doing together. All right? So as a public manager, you're duty-bound, in some sense, to help public come into existence to define and create public value using you as their particular agent. It's also true that as a public manager, once you begin thinking that your job might be to create public value, some things begin to change in the way that you think about your job. It no longer feels like a job of essentially process management in which you've done a good job if you did things according to policies and procedures. It becomes a question about whether you've imagined the uses that you could make of the assets that are under your control to produce something that would improve the prosperity, civility, or justice of the society in which we live. And that invites you to be more creative, to have a restless value-creating imagination. It also reminds you that the people that you see at the end of your government activity aren't really exactly the same as customers. They're people who citizens and taxpayers have thought about and decided to interact with in a particular way through the instrumentality of government to improve conditions as the citizens and taxpayers saw it rather than as the individuals saw it. So the concept of public value invites you to think a little bit differently about who it is that you're working for and what it is that you're trying to create for them. And we're going to explore that in more detail in a moment.